You never know. And we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Oz Property Investors. We have two absolute legends here, Bushy Martin and the one and only Scotty Agate. We have Bushy as the guest and Scott Agate as the host. So you are in for an absolute treat. How are you, gentlemen? How are you, Bushy?
Awesome, mate. It's a great day to be alive and very humbled and honoured to be joining you two gentlemen tonight, guys.
I'm pumped for it. This is going to be a very interesting conversation. Scotty, what about you, mate? How are you?
I'm just excited because I get a chance to grill Bushy. So this is a rare opportunity for me. So I've got like 1,000 questions, Bushy, ready to go. So you're gonna get nailed. I'm only joking.
Scotty, do I get a cigarette and a blindfold before you start nailing me? Or?
Maybe.
Yeah, we've lined up a session that Bushy thinks he's doing. He thinks he's talking about recession-proofing a business, but we're actually talking about hand knitting. So
I couldn't even pick up knitting sticks, mate. So you picked the wrong person for that subject.
Well, everyone, throw in your questions, throw in your comments as we go along. Also, one of the things I like to do is if you get any kind of nuggets of wisdom, throw in there. Like, that's my nugget for today, or nugget, or something like that, because it's always good to. Some people don't catch on to the little bits, and some are valuable for the others. But I'm excited to jump into this session. But let's run through our quote of the week. Bushy, it's always good to have the guest doing theirs. What is your quote of the week?
Yes, well, mine's an old Buffettism. I'm a big fan of the old Warren Buffett, and it's, I think, quite appropriate to the times that we're coming into, and that's to be greedy when people are being fearful, and to be fearful when people are greedy, because we're certainly in the middle of a fear zone that the good old mainstream media is hell-bent on scaring the living hell out of us, particularly in the property market at the moment, because they haven't got too many other things to scare us with. So I think the old Buffettism is a very appropriate quote for time.
Yeah,
I
agree. Yeah, it's a perfect opportunity. It's like during the COVID times, that was the best time ever and the scariest time ever. So maybe the higher the fear, the higher the opportunity. Maybe not.
I totally agree, mate. Spot on.
What about you, Scotty Agate? What have you got?
Well, I was going to lead with Elon, which is my favorite quote of this year, but it's probably a lot of people's favorite quote when he's trying to buy Twitter. So I've just quickly researched another one that I found, which I'm going to use because we're focusing on kind of, people panicking at the moment and the level-headed advice that Bushy's going to give about people's portfolios. So I'm going to go with this one, which I found just now, which is, you can't make someone love you. All you can do is stalk them and hope they panic and give in.
Oh, good.
Panic theme.
Was that your diary from when you were 18?
Yeah, probably.
Did you pick that one up?
But then he called me and it all worked out fine, so it was good.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why they call you the closer. I've got a little. I was reading through one of your books, Bushy. It was either Get Invested. I think it was Get Invested, actually, and I really liked it. It was, the bad news is time flies. The good news is you're the pilot. And I think the concept that you were trying to get across with that one was you are the one in control. There's nobody else in control of your financial destiny. It is up to you. You are the pilot, and you get to determine what's going on. So I'm all about that one.
Yeah.
Did you pen that, Bushy, or did you find that one on Google?
Oh, mate, there's about 1,000 quotes in my books because I love quotes, and the few originals, that one's not. But no. it is very appropriate, and it's going to be very appropriate to our discussion tonight, gentlemen, because that pilot analogy is going to get quite a run during our discussions. So watch out for that.
It's going to take off. Okay, well, let's do it. We are going to jump into our first sponsor of today, a man that needs no introduction, and then we will jump into the wonderful presentation of Mr. Bushy Martin and who this gentleman is and why we are super interested in having that conversation. So let's do that now. Oh, God. It's not loaded. Hold on. We're having some real technical difficulties.
Hi, this show has been brought to you by Scott Agate and Hello House.
Could you hear that?
Name in property negotiation. Are you running an ad or?
Oh, Lord. Oh, this has gone from bad to worse. That's not good. It's literally... You can hear me speaking, can't you? But you can't see it.
Yeah, we've lost you briefly.
What the fuck? Okay.
Now he's gone all together.
Power is out. For you and me, Bushy, we'll just have a little chin wag.
Yeah.
You can do an hour and a half presentation.
I can do an advert for you, Scott, on Hello House. Given, here we go. I can see a little bit of it there.
Without the volume, I'm not paying for this one, Joey.
This is a Marcel.
There's no volume. Is there no volume?
No sound.
No sound.
I'm happy for you to not run it. We can just jump into Bushy's chat.
No, I think there's been some errors here. There's been some errors here. This is why we need Jeff. Like, everyone thinks that, oh, it's just me running the entire show. No, without Jeff, this whole thing falls apart. So let's just jump into our sponsor now. Can you hear it?
No.
No sound. Looks good, but no sound. Very impressive there, Scott.
Thanks. Joey actually made this for us. There you go. That sounds about 30 kilos lighter.
And property transactions, along with running 3-bell franchises. He knows all these agent tricks. Scott has created an in-depth 5-step process for his leading agent finder service. First, he establishes the true market value for your property. He uses a triangulation method to shortlist the leading agents, creates a competitive environment for those agents to send through their best proposals, vets those proposals, and then he negotiates the best agent fees for you. This ensures that you're not only getting the best rate for selling, but most importantly, you have a leading agent on your side selling your property to maximize the end sale value. Oh, and did I mention this service is completely free? If you'd like to know exactly how Scott runs his 5-step leading agent finder service, he's detailed it with the link below. Or if you'd like to speak with Scott to help find you the leading agent in your area, book a call today.
Scott, refund. You're going to have to get a refund on that one.
That's all good. I'm more interested in Bushy's chat anyway than the half-played ad.
Well, that is why we're all here. So I wanted to do a bit of an introduction to the man that is Bushy Martin, and we are in some interesting times and scary times, and the media is absolutely going mental. And one of the things that I like to do is when I haven't experienced something before, I want to go back and talk to the people that have been through it before, or look at history. And Bushy, you've been in property for over 40 years, so a high-level introduction. Starting out, Bushy was an architect, and you quickly realized that you were working yourself to the bone, working 7 days a week, and you kind of bought yourself a job. And you decided to change a couple of things. Fast forward, you have now decided to live with your wife, living by design, which is a concept I think you've coined. And essentially, you have an international portfolio of 12 plus properties and created Know-How Property Finance, which allows you to share with other people the tools and resources that you've been able to get access to help build out your portfolio. You're also the best-selling author of The Freedom Formula and Get Invested. And you're also Give Back as well. I think you won Mentor of the Year you won Mentor of the Year, top 10 property investment specialist in 2017, and also have an MBA. What else, Bushy? What else don't we know about you? That is quite the resume.
Well, I guess I'm privileged to be at a point in my lifestyle where I get the greatest satisfaction out of sharing knowledge with others, because the big challenge with property, as we all know, guys, is that you just don't know what you don't know most of the time, and it's not until you trip over it that you suddenly find out how expensive some of that lack of knowledge is. So I'm really on a mission now to wake up and shake up as many hardworking Aussies as I possibly can to the opportunity that property gives them to really set themselves up to live the life that they have always wanted to, and do it in a safe, easy and affordable way, so that they're not putting themselves in major risk or in major financial stress along that journey, which is going to be pretty appropriate to some of the stuff we're going to cover off tonight, guys.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, Bushy, I had a question for you on that in terms of the mentoring side of it. What's a typical age of when people kind of realize and the penny drops for them that they look to go on a journey like that where you can step in and kind of give them the right advice, and then they can take that advice and power on? Is it kind of a mid-20s thing, or is it later in life when they're a bit more set up financially? Or
yeah, there's no real definite age group. It's more a knowledge point where someone will get to a certain stage in their career and go, right, there's got to be more to life than this. And getting stuck on the rat race and running on the treadmill, working hard for a job, they suddenly realise it's not going to work. So I see quite a few in their early 20s who go, no, this is, working like this for the next 40 years is not my cup of tea. I then get those that are in their mid to late 30s who have got a bit of a family. It's starting to settle down a little bit. They're getting very frustrated at work, and they're starting to hit the ceiling and go, no, I can't do this for much longer. And then I get the oh shit superset, which are the ones that are more in the sort of early 50s to mid 50s stage, who go, oh shit, my super's not going to be enough to do what I want to do and tick off the bucket list when I try and stop work. I need to start getting invested to do something about it. So there isn't one really fixed exercise, but it would range from the sort of late 20s through to late 40s as the core group that starts to go, right, we really need to get ourselves organised here.
Makes sense.
Yeah, super interesting. It's it's I don't know, is it a moment that people feel where they're like, oh, actually I need to, the way I like to think about it is it's actually capturing the value that you're creating in the world. Like a lot of people just work for somebody else and work and give them the value, but they don't actually try and capture it and put it into something like an asset class. But one of the topics that we wanted to cover off today was the world has gone a little crazy. So from a macro, like you, Bushy, you've been in the industry for what, 40 years now? It's absolutely crazy. Give us a bit of a rundown of like the macroeconomics of what is happening in Australia and your views from it. In that perspective.
Yeah, I might throw the net a little bit wider than that, actually, Joe, because I think as much as we like to think that we are an island isolated from everyone else in this country, in this day and age, we're not. So, what's happening in the rest of the world has a massive flow-on effect to what's happening here. And in particular, the two major exercises that are really worth keeping an eye on at the moment are, one, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. With the big part of the subject we're going to talk about tonight is inflation, interest rates, what it means and what we need to be doing to look after ourselves in that regard. And one of the major drivers of inflation that has occurred is this sudden shock of the Putin's invasion on the Ukraine. And you might go, well, what the hell's that got to do with inflation, interest rates and property in Australia? Well, it actually has a lot to do with it, because really simply, about 40% of Europe's energy needs come out of Russia, and the tap's been turned off. So suddenly they are needing to get fuel reserves and energy from other sources, and as you'd expect, the costs of those fuel reserves have gone through the roof, and everything we do is transported somewhere. So the cost of goods generally has jumped and spiked quite substantially as a consequence of that. And we're already in a tough situation given supply chain shortages and everything else that was affecting building costs and the rest of the routine. And the other thing that's come into play is really the situation in China, because as we all know, China is really the manufacturing and service hub for the world these days. And given they've very late in the piece gone into COVID lockdowns, then the manufacturing side of the equation has ground to a halt in China. Chinese consumption, which represents a massive component of what's happening in the world, has also ground to a halt. And as a consequence of that, supplies have dropped off. And therefore, if you look at the old demand supply equation, surprise, surprise, prices have jumped through the roof. So there's some big impacts there. And on the local front, I wouldn't underestimate the impact that the natural disasters has had on our own local front in terms of particularly the floods early in the year. Again, it's dampened supply. It's injured our energy transmission quite significantly, and the flow-on effect is again limited supply and high demand. So we're paying a lot more for the things that we're used to, and that's happened extremely quickly.
Yeah, because that's one of the interesting things about the whole inflation story that we're talking about, is that we're not seeing it all rise at once. It's some necessary components of living, like fuel, is raising quite a lot. So what are your thoughts around how long this thing is going to be around? Because what is it at five, inflation is coming at 5.5. I think in the US it's gone to 7.7. So it is starting to get quite out of control. But what are your thoughts on the long-term aspects and outlook for it?
Yeah, I've done a lot of reading on the subject in recent times, given its influence. And, I think the headline inflation hit 5.1% recently. Depending on who you listen to and who you talk to, it's going to go to somewhere between 6 to 7% over the next 6 months or so. And that's the very reason why the RBA has jumped in and started to pull the handbrake on very quickly as far as raising rates is concerned. So I'm pretty keen to dive into some of that to put some real context around both inflation and interest rates for us, so that anyone who's listening in can get a real sense over what the impacts are going to be and where the opportunities are going to be, because fear's an interesting thing, because in the absence of knowledge, that's where most of our fear comes from. Once we take the time to dive into the information that's available to us, then that fear tends to subside, because we've got more clarity and certainty over what is otherwise an uncertain situation. So I'm pretty keen to unpack some of that tonight, and I've put some slides together that visually sort of reinforce some of those key points so that it all makes sense.
Yeah, that's the one thing that's what I think about fear, is like the closer you get to it, the less scary it is. But when it's so far away, like when you lift the veil of what actually the thing is, once you have that knowledge, it gets rid of a whole heap of the fear. You still have to, it's still scary, but once you understand the complexity behind it, it doesn't become the scariest thing in the world that's going to all of a sudden, because what you don't want people to be doing is doing a long-term action that is based on a short-term situation. That's where you start to get into trouble, when you sell an asset or you do something silly, buy an asset even, when it's based off of, oh my gosh, I got to be quick and I'm just going to sacrifice on quality, which I'm sure we're going to chat to. But should we jump into these? Have you got any points that you wanted to mention there, Scotty, about the whole inflation story?
Not so much. I'm really interested in Bushy's view of that, and interest rates in particular that we hit on just then. So I'd be a keen listener to that. But all I was thinking then, when you were talking about the fear side of things and the unknown for a lot of people, where that stems from, is really highlighted at the moment, or in the last 10 years, in this Facebook world where everyone is so incredibly opinionated about things as well. So a lot of it is uneducated people shooting their mouth off about certain things to have relevance in their social pecking order, and that's creating and playing on those fear elements. And it's just, it's making for some good headlines, isn't it?
Yeah, spot on. There's in my books, I talked about the inverse law of investment, where the less knowledge you have, the more opinionated you are, and the more knowledge you have, the quieter you are about it. Because I often find that people who know nothing and have never done what they're suggesting that you're doing have the strongest and loudest opinions. But when it comes to the crunch, they've done nothing themselves. So it's I always find that pretty interesting. And the older I get, the less I know. That's the one thing that I can tell you guys.
I like it.
Yeah,
well,
totally
jump into the next bit, Joey, because I'm keen to learn some more.
Okay, so we've got your slides up now, Bushy. So you're in control of them. So you just run us through these suckers.
Yeah, just and let's start with fear, because some people use fear as an excuse not to do anything. And let's face it, our lizard brain is such that we are genetically created to protect and survive situations. But what used to happen in the tribal times totally isn't appropriate to what we're doing now. And I often say that, fear, if you break fear down, is just false evidence appearing real, which is really pertinent in terms of what the media is doing with it. And we've really got two choices around fear, and that is to forget everything and run, or to face everything and rise. And I guess my own approach to fear has been that I use fear as an indicator of when I should be doing something. So rather than run away from it, I use fear as a motivator to make sure that I'm actually putting myself in situations where I can grow and learn. So don't use fear to run away. And I guess the unfortunate situation these days, guys, is that the mainstream media in particular, who their own existence is really threatened because the advertising dollars are down. So their only way of engaging our eyeballs and our earbuds is to use fear to keep us doing so. And it's the one takeaway that I'm hoping everyone embraces from the discussion tonight is the best thing you can do before you do anything else is just turn off the TV and throw away the newspaper and stop reading it online, because I started doing that about 25 years ago, and I've never been happier. In that sense, ignorance of all of that rubbish is bliss. So very strongly suggest people just focus on quality information and think about the vested interest of the people that are sort of pushing a certain line, because everyone's got a vested interest of some degree. So it's really important to get your information from credible sources that are based on true facts rather than sensationalism as a way to try and sell advertising. So that's
it's hard to do that, isn't it? In certain places where you get your information from, because everyone's positioned as an expert, it can be really difficult to determine what's accurate and what's not without digging a lot deeper.
It's spot on, absolutely spot on, and it's worth sort of cross-checking information so that you're ticking that box from a couple of different sources to make sure there's some reality in it. But go to people who have actually done what they're talking about. I'm sort of really gun shy on people who are very quick to tell you what to do, but just don't walk their own talk. And it's fairly easy to uncover how that goes. But I guess the starting point. Yep, go on.
It's also human psychology as well. There was a post someone did the other day where they posted like a positive news, like, oh, interest rates rise. This means that the economy is trying to beat inflation, which is great. And then the negative one, and then they posted both, and it had like 1,000 clicks and then like 8 clicks for the positive news story. So people want to we want to have that kind of feeling of, oh my gosh, what is this? I need to learn. I need to protect myself. But it's not necessarily the best thing for us.
It's spot on. I think it's really important as a starting point to really identify where you are on what I call the axis of uncertainty, because most of our fear is driven around uncertainty. And if you look on screen there's really 4 quadrants. That the horizontal axis is from one level as being underprepared to overprepared, and on the vertical axis it's ranging from panic to calm. And where we want to be is the calm and confident green square in the bottom right-hand corner, and get away from the red and the yellow squares, which are stunned and into inaction when you're underprepared and panicking, or you're overprepared and panicking and therefore hysterical about what's going on. You don't want to be underprepared and calm, because then you're in a position where who gives a crap. But if you're calm and overprepared, and that is about investing in the right knowledge to be able to make fully informed decisions, then that's where we need to be moving. So let's jump into the inflation debate for a minute, if you like. And I just want to sort of put some facts and figures around inflation in terms of what it is, what has it done historically, where are we at now, and where is it going to, just to reinforce what we talked about briefly before. And let's face it, inflation is pretty simple. It's just the increase in cost over time of things generally. And, to give you a very graphic example, gentlemen, if we go way back to when I was in primary school, and I won't tell you when that is, but it's a long time ago, my school, I used to, once a week as a special treat, as a country boy, we used to get 20 cents for lunch. And that 20 cents would buy me a Kitchener bun for recess, a pie with sauce for lunch, and then I had enough at the end of the day to buy a Sunny Boy, and they don't even make Sunny Boys anymore.
They were good.
Don't they?
Yeah,
we
you
had
guys know
Sunny
them?
Boys.
You remember them?
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
we had Sunny Boys.
Yeah.
Sunny Boys, and I would also get a small bag of lollies or a small bag of chips, and I still had a couple of cents left over to put into the savings can. Now that was 20 cents. Now I did a quick stop check the other day to see what that would cost me now, and that would cost me about $16 to do the same thing. So we've seen inflation in my lunch of about 7,900% increase in price over that time, which equates to a bit over 8% inflation.
In just over 100 years. That's a huge step, isn't it?
Yeah, just call me Rumpelstiltskin there, guys.
So why is inflation so bad? Why is it such a why does it, well, maybe why does it exist in the first place, which might be a big question, but then why is it so bad?
Well, I don't think it is. This is just the point. I don't think inflation is necessarily a bad thing, other than if you've got your money sitting in coin under your bed, then your buying power decreases over time. But where inflation really works for us is when we're buying assets that are slipstreaming on those increases. So inflation can be good or bad depending on what position you're in. But I would like to break down inflation a little bit, because that's really important in the context of where we're at and what is actually driving inflation at the moment, because I'd like to sort of jump into that a little bit. And there's really two causes of inflation. There's cost push inflation, when the cost of production increases, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. As I mentioned, the Russian situation and the situation in China is causing some cost push inflation. But there's also the demand pull inflation, which is where the demand for goods increases and exceeds the actual capacity of where we're going. So, and I'll come back to that in a minute, because what increasing rates does is has a meaningful impact on a delayed fashion on the demand side of the equation, but has very little impact on the supply side. So that's going to be pretty important in terms of what the RBA hopes to achieve through increasing rates in the short to medium term. So let's sort of put some shape around inflation, so that we all understand how it has performed over time, and where the ideal position for inflation is, because the average inflation since the GFC back in 2009 has been around about 2%. Now, it does fluctuate up and down. It's a bit of a wave exercise. The target range that the RBA likes to keep it in is in that 2 to 3% range. And the reason why they like to keep it positive is that it means that our sense of confidence around what's happening with things gradually increasing in value helps the wealth effect and gives us the confidence to keep spending, and that keeps the wheels of the economy going. But if you sort of look back beyond that, if we go right back to the 1950s, which is roughly when the RBA actually kicked off and took over from the Commonwealth Bank as our central bank, the average inflation through that period right up until 2022 has been 4.86%. So if you put that in the context of current inflation being at 5.1, that's not that scary. And this is the thing. It's when I hear 5.1, it's like, yeah, okay, well that's okay. Yes, it's projected to go up to 6 to 7%, and that's with the impact of rising rates in the short to medium term. But it does mean that those sorts of numbers aren't scary. Back in the 1950s, around the Korean War, inflation was nearly at 25%. And the lowest it's ever been about negative 1.3% back in 1961. So you can see there's been quite a bit of variation. It does tend to go in waves. The good news is that with the macroprudential controls and the impact of the RBA, particularly over since the mid 2000s, with the exception of what happened during the GFC, it's been controlled pretty strongly. So I guess that puts some context in it. Now, the reason why the Reserve Bank has all of a sudden changed their tune because, you know, as we all know, for quite some time, the RBA was saying, look, we're not going to touch rates until 2024. We won't do anything about it until inflation is consistently within the 2 to 3% range, and we're at full employment and wages start to increase. Now, what has surprised me, because I was surprised at how early they pulled the trigger on this, but the reason for that is that the RBA themselves were actually very surprised at the sudden spike in inflation that occurred between the last quarter of 2021 and the end of the first quarter this year. And it spiked from 3.5% up to 5.1% in the space of 3 months. That caught them by surprise.
Almost double.
Yeah, almost double. And if you look at the CPI, it actually also spiked in that quarter to 2.1%. If you annualize that, that's 8% annually. So I sort of understand now why there's been a complete change in the rhetoric and the narrative as far as the RBA is concerned. And the thing that we need to remember, and this is important in the context, because the RBA has copped a lot of criticism in recent times for, you know, getting it wrong and making mistakes. I think we really need to understand the situation that they're in, and the best analogy that I can use, and hence going back to your pilot quote at the start of the exercise, Joe, the best analogy I can think of is that the RBA governor is like the pilot of a jumbo jet, and he's flying in the dark. His instrument panel is completely gone out. The only view that he's got is through the side mirror on the jumbo, looking back in the dark at receding lights that are disappearing pretty quickly. And that's the historic data that they rely on, because remembering that the data the RBA actually uses to make their decisions is anywhere between 1 to 6 months old. And as we know, in the current scheme of things, a lot can change over that period of time. So,
well, incredibly reactive based on those two world events then in that last quarter, wasn't it?
Incredibly reactive, absolutely reactive. And the other thing that we've got to keep in tow here is that the only instrument they really have to either increase the speed and altitude or slow it down is interest rates, because it's a little bit like a handbrake. It's like the ailerons on the jumbo. They can change the speed slightly by pulling them on, but it's a very blunt instrument, and it's a delayed instrument, because any impacts that we start now generally don't flow through into the economy for anywhere between 3 and 6 months. So if you keep that in mind, then it's not a surprise that, given the results that they saw on those supply shocks on inflation, that they've pulled the handbrake on extremely hard, and they'll continue to do that in the short to medium term before they stop and prop and then see what impact that's having. So that sort of puts a little bit of context around it. Why do interest rates have an impact on inflation? Well, it's fairly simple, really. If you look at it in simple terms, if we raise rates, then it effectively means that we've got less disposable income, which means that we've got less discretionary money to spend. It also means that we start to lose a little bit of confidence, because the obvious impact of that is that property prices, in particular in Australia, given that the majority of there's about 10 million homes in Australia, about 6 million of those have home loans against them. So you can see why pulling on the handbrake of interest rates by jacking them up can slow things down pretty quickly, because all of a sudden we're paying more for the home loans, we've got less to spend on everything else, our confidence starts to falter, and we generally see property markets soften during these times. Conversely, though, and we saw this with COVID, when they completely threw the handbrake away, dropped it to zero. We saw that, together with an enormous printing of money, which is code for buying bonds, and the stimulus packages that then occurred, meant that we saw the massive increase in prices in property that we've seen over the last couple of years. So one of the analogies I'd like to use is that it's the old credit, cash, and confidence connection. So if you tighten credit, you reduce cash, that reduces confidence and the economy slows down. Conversely, if you improve the access to credit, both the amount and the cost of it, then we've got more cash to spend. That improves our confidence and the economy starts to climb. But it's a very finely tuned exercise. And because I've only got that one instrument, then what tends to start happening, as we've seen in the past, is that it starts to oscillate. So we've triggered an oscillation now. And what we want to be doing is getting the plane in a nice, steady, very slow upward growth pattern, where at the moment it's starting to get buffeted. And once that sort of rhythm starts, it takes a fair while to shake it out of the system.
I had two questions for you, Bushy, if I can jump in for a second here. So one is if those world events change back quickly, and they could over 3 to 6 months, and COVID starts to fade away globally, if they go hard on rates in the short term because it's out of the comfort band, are we then going to find ourselves in a position where they're going to have to drop rates again to balance where they've gone? So that's the first question. Second question is going to be around, are we in a different stage of the economy or the cycle this time? Because much has been said about how much mortgage pressure there'll be with rates rising fast, and I get it, but they're coming off an incredibly low base, as we've discussed, and it hasn't been like this forever. So money has been incredibly cheap for people. And secondly, from my understanding of the real numbers, there's so many of those houses have got little to no debt against a very valuable asset. So it's not like they're under incredibly high pressure to affecting their cash flow in terms of households. Is that changing the scenario as well this time around compared to previous cycles like that, where interest rates would have jacked up that much and really had a big impact?
Yes and no. I mean, that's a roundabout exercise, but in very simple terms, we're much more sensitized now to rates, because effectively, if you look at the situation in the GFC, for example, versus where we're at now, the average mortgage has doubled in size. So the average mortgage in 2010 was a bit over 300,000. The average mortgage now is about 600,000. So yes, the asset size has increased, but the level of debt is also increased, which means that there is an increased sensitivity to what happens with interest rates. So you would think that on that basis that the impacts will happen pretty quickly. But what's working against that to some degree is that, again, during the COVID emergency exercise, where the government offered very cheap money to the banks, that resulted in the banks offering incredibly cheap fixed rates. So, and normally
a portion of the market that's locked into a fixed rate for some time still to come. Yeah,
totally spot on, Scott. So, I think this is going to be interesting to see how this folds out, because there's a lot of people that are locked into 2 to 3 year fixed rates that won't expire for another 12 months to 2 years yet, based on that scenario. So
they
the
might outrun
RBA, they may be a little bit disappointed that the spending impact that these rate increases are having may not have quite as much of an influence as what they think it might be.
Well, because from a property investment standpoint, rents have raised 30%. So I don't see property investors being the real concern here. I don't see people that have already paid off their house 100%. They're not going to get affected by a rate rise.
No.
People that have little to no mortgage, they're not going to get affected. It's the people that are in the more expensive locations where they've stretched themselves a little bit too far, where I can start to see people getting a little bit, oh, actually, I probably shouldn't have gone an extra 300 grand on this one. But I don't see it having such a crazy effect.
But aren't they all stress tested at a much higher rate anyway, Bushy? I mean,
spot on. Spot on, Scott. The reality is that up until October last year, due to macro-prudential impacts through APRA, the banks also all put a 2.5% buffer on top of the rates before they would approve a loan. That increased to 3% at the end of October last year, which builds in a fair bit of fat. There's also, there's various quoted numbers around about how far in front Australians are on the home loan, and also how much money is sitting in offset accounts, because, I've heard figures of over 100 billion in funds sitting in people's offsets around the country. So there's a fair bit of fat that has, surrounded the exercise of most people. And you make a good point, Joe. It'll only be the fringes, those that have borrowed the max or taking advantage of some of those government schemes where they're only putting in a 2% deposit effectively. There's a fair chance that, unfortunately,
people they're trying to help.
Yeah. I mean, it gets them into home ownership, but it can potentially put them in a dangerous position because with property values softening, and they started softening before the rate rises even kicked in, then there'll be those on the fringes that will be effectively in negative equity. So they're probably most at risk, but there's only a fairly small number of those, despite what you see on the mainstream news, of course.
So how much does a rate increase affect property prices? Property.
Good question. And there's another unanswered question there in terms of how far will they rise and when will that stop? Because again, depending on what you read and who you look to, there's a fair chance that because of that overcorrection that might occur as a result of rates rising pretty rapidly in the short to medium term, in the latter part of next year, there's just much of an equal chance that rates might start coming down again. So, which creates a bit of a window of opportunity that I want to talk a little bit about. Coming back to your point there, Joe, as I mentioned, the average mortgage at the moment around the country, and this is the national average, is just a tad under 600,000. So on a $600,000 principal and interest loan, and remembering that most investors, if they've structured things well, their investment properties are on interest only, so that they're channeling any surplus funds into getting rid of that non-deductible debt. Then on a simple basis, on a 0.1% increase of a loan on a mortgage of that amount, your mortgage goes up $8 a week or $34 a month. So that's 0.1. So we've gone up 0.7. Yeah, exactly right. So if we roll that forward, then, and again, to put some context around this, the average RBA cash rate, which is generally anywhere between 1.5% to 3% below what bank rates are, the average from 1990 to 2022 has been 3.88%. Now we're at 0.85%. So, we've really been in a honeymoon period for the last 2 years. And anyone who thought that was normal has really been kidding themselves in the context of what the
getting a wake up call now.
Yeah.
I had a stat yesterday that I posted actually that I saw in a UBS survey that had 51% of homeowners in Australia are more than 3 months ahead on their mortgage.
Yep.
And 25% have got saving buffers and emergency funds to cover 7 to 12 months of repayments. Yep. So if that's accurate, then that paints a pretty healthy picture in terms of how Australians are going to get through this rough trial.
Well, that's what COVID had, right? That's what COVID did. It made us sit at home and save our money. So we went from 2% saving rate to 16% saving rate, and we haven't yet had the opportunity to go out there and spend it. Bali has only been open 3 months, and I haven't been able to book my ticket just yet.
I spent all my money on beer while I was at home during COVID, Joey. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, again, putting the context around that means that the discounted variable rate, and I'm not talking the standard variable rates because there's very few people on the standard variable rates that the bank offers, but the average discount variable rate over the last 30 or 40 odd years has been about 5.88%, and the current variable rate after the average current variable rate after the last rate hike's about 3.23%. So there's a fair bit of headway in that exercise. Now, where's it going to go to? That's the $1 million question. And again, how long's a piece of string and how good's your crystal ball? Because there are so many dynamics being the pilot of that economic jumbo, and so many uncertainties on the horizon that we just don't know about.
So what are we looking at here?
Yeah. So what I'm really wanting to convey here is where rates are likely to go. So the RBA sort of intimated, hasn't actually said it, sort of intimated.
That's 1.5%. I thought that was like a massive amount. I thought it was like 50. I was like, wow, this is really getting serious.
No. visually it might be a bit scary, but what the RBA is sort of suggesting is that a neutral catch rate to keep us in that sort of 2 to 3% inflation band, maybe around the 2.5%. And again, everyone's an expert when it comes to where it's going to land, but I'm seeing a range of sort of up to 2% increase, a 2% cash rate by the end of this year, and maybe getting to 2.5% by the middle of 2023. But then again, as I say, given the oscillations and given the short-term nature of some of the supply side impacts on inflation, there's a better than even chance that rates will start coming down again late next year. So again, let's put that into context. What does that mean in terms of the overall impact? Well, if we have effectively, if the cash rate goes to 2% and we started at 0.1% back in April, then based on that $600,000 P&I loan, then that'll effectively, the total increase in cost will be $150 a week. And if it gets to 2.5% by the middle of next year, then the total increase from the low base is about $196 a week. So, you know, there's enough in that if you've got a $600,000 loan. Just in broad terms, if you've got an interest-only loan on an investment property, then the difference between P&I and interest-only is about 30%. So the repayments somewhere between 30 and 35% less if you've got an interest-only loan. So again, they're not
so
massive.
If you flip to interest only, you might be able to get away with less than $150 a week increase at that highest point, 2.5%.
Yeah, exactly, about $100 a week, roughly.
There's a question. Oh, sorry, Bushy, to cut you off. I was going to say there's a question from a Facebook user, the bottom one there. The rate rising shouldn't affect any conservative homeowner with a mortgage. Where I see the problem is on business and corporate debt and the cost of goods increasing exponentially. Otherwise, the businesses die. This is what will hurt the mortgage holders, not the increase to the weekly cost of their home loan repayments. So
that's a very good point. It will definitely dent business confidence. And this is the whole intention. What the RBA is trying to do is slow the economy down, but it also knows that it's a much more finely tuned instrument these days. So, you know, that's why I'm suggesting that while we might see some increases in the short to medium term, there's an equal chance that it's going to come down again because the RBA is rightly concerned that if they pull the handbrake on too quickly and we start to stall and we start getting into recessionary conditions, then that has a whole series of other issues. So given the fact that the federal government's deficit is so huge and their own debt servicing will be challenged by any rate rise, together with what's happening to us as individuals and the business community, then I think any sort of scare tactics that the media is using to indicate that the rates are going to go through the roof and that the property markets are going to crash is pretty much ill-founded as a consequence.
Yeah, yeah. There's I was a conversation I was having with Scotty actually. You were talking about an article you saw, Scott, about rate hikes and what they mean in real terms on property prices, and it was pretty interesting to hear. Have you got any highlights from that, or do you want me to share the highlights that I've got?
Oh, you can go for it. It's just interesting. I've actually seen this shared by quite a few people over multiple cycles that I've been in the industry for 25 years plus as well. And it's just that correlation between interest rates and property prices and what actually happens versus what's the market or the media's perception of it, because it's vastly different. And it's really interesting when I see that stat every time about how much rates go up and then what really the impact is directly on the property market. And of course, what happened previously is no guide to what's going to happen again in the future. But it is interesting to go back and track those things, just like we've gone back and tracked those, inflation bands and things over time as well.
Well, that's what I found the most interesting thing, right? Like what I said at the beginning of the opening was, what do you do when you haven't experienced something before? You go back and look in history. And from August 1994 to December 1994, they had a 275 basis point increase. And what did that do to the property market? So the property market moved 0% in the first year. In the second year, it moved 1.2. And in 5 years, it moved to 21.5. And again, there was a raise in 1990 to 2000. We had a growth of 6.6% in the first year, 23.1%, and 70%. So one thing is there are so many other factors affecting the property market that it's so easy to say that interest rates are the only factor and it's going to crash the market. It's just not the case. It is definitely a contributing factor. But looking back at history, this doesn't say that the property market's going to crash.
Not at all. It will soften. There's no doubt that there generally is a delayed correlation between the cost and access to credit and property values, and it's pretty obvious because it's not only the cost of the debt that increases, but every time we see an increase, again, this is just a rough rule of thumb, but for every 1% increase in interest rates, based on an average size loan, your borrowing capacity reduces by about 100,000. So it's
double
borrowing
edged. It's a
capacity
double-edged sword
reduction that has more impact than the cost, actually, because it means that you can't physically spend as much on property as what you previously could.
I think that's an incredibly overlooked stat, what you just said just then, because I don't think many people factor that into the process when they're looking at the property market and how that'll affect it and how it'll affect them specifically. It's a lot of it is driven around affordability and also confidence, but that is just a straight out direct repercussion of that, which seriously impacts buying power. So it's
it does.
a very notable stat.
Yeah, it's funny that you don't hear that more often. Like that's the bigger, like if someone said, oh, what's going to affect the property prices, interest rates going up a little bit or the access to capital for a market, like we're now saying that a percentage increase rise means that you're losing $100,000 worth of liquidity to a market. That's going to have a much larger effect than the cost raising $25 a week.
Spot on. And you're absolutely right, guys. It's something that we talk about a fair bit because I've always said that your key focus as an investor in particular is capacity, not cost. And if your capacity is impaired, which is going to happen as rates rise over the next 6 to 9 months, then that's going to have a much more meaningful impact on property values because people just won't be able to spend as much as what they thought they would to secure the property. So that's pretty.
I'll jump to your slides.
I was going to the quick question here as well from one of the users there, that as interest rates go up, many property investors will go from positive income to a negatively geared portfolio, effectively a buffer zone. Do either of you guys have a stat around what an average ROI is for an investor across Australia? Are most people sitting in that kind of, negatively geared or neutral or positive stance?
I can only talk.
I don't know that stat. I don't know that stat.
Yeah, I don't have a national stat. I can only say that the investors that we help won't go into a property unless it's positive cash flow, and that's as much about structuring as anything else. But for those who have pursued the negative gearing exercise, then it is going to be challenging. There's no question about it. It will be a cost, and if you don't have buffers in play, and/or you're mid-lease and you don't have the opportunity to renegotiate the lease until lease expiry, then you'll have to rely on some funds that you've stashed away in the short to medium term. But this is where the whole structuring the exercise becomes absolutely critical, and it's something I want to go into in a minute so that we can share some of the key things that people can do in that regard to cover these sorts of periods when they may have to be dipping into reserves to get through.
Yeah, it's amazing how many great mortgage brokers and financial professionals that we have on the show and talk to, and we're always chatting with amazing people, that positive cash flow is a big part of what they talk about in their structuring for clients. Not only positive cash flow, obviously there's capital growth included in it, but it's becoming more and more evident how important in these type of times having positive cash flow or having some good income coming into your portfolio, that is going to be the thing that keeps the ship going. If you have to bail out halfway through at the worst time, like selling a property now may be a terrible time to be selling, but if you held it for another 3 years, maybe that's the best time to be selling when you don't need to.
Depends if you're offloading offloading a dud asset and then you're deploying that capital on a better investment elsewhere. It's all relative, isn't it? But yeah,
it's like when people say, I sold this property at the peak. Well, you then bought at a great time as well, and you bought a great asset, and you did everything you could with that money in that time. But what are we looking at here, Bushy?
Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly talk about the impact that it's starting to have on the property market. Now, as I mentioned, the property market started to soften, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, pre the rate rises, and that's inevitable. I mean, let's face it, we've had between 20 to 30% growth in property over the last couple of years, which is really effectively, if you look at the average capital growth over the last 30 years, nationally, that's been about 6.8%. So we've effectively had between 6 to 10 years of growth in 2 years. And what inevitably happens in those situations particularly where some markets have overshot, B-grade properties are going to come back. So we're likely to see values drop between 5 to 10% for average locations and average properties. And as I know, Scott, you're a big believer in this as well. The quality of your asset selection is absolutely crucial, regardless of what times you're in, because that will be your best protection when we go through periods like we're about to, where things do soften a little bit. And the other key thing that I just want to reinforce there on your point, Joe, is that most investors are going for growth, but it's got to be affordable growth. And I'll talk in a minute about my own personal approach to building a portfolio and the sort of structure and strategy that we utilise with others that we help to do the same. But
that's a great way to put it. Affordable growth. That's my key takeaway from this. That is my little word to use. Affordable growth.
Yeah, and it is a key exercise, because if we're holding a property, and again, I'll talk a little bit about horizons in a minute, but in my own view, you need to be holding a property for a minimum of 15 years. And if you do so, you'll go through a full cycle, which means that if you go through a full cycle, you don't need to be worried about picking tops and bottoms. You just need to structure it in such a way that the property is washing its own face while you're holding on to it. And then the best time to buy a property is every time you can afford to. So let me just talk through this very briefly, because the good news, I think, moving forward now that the sort of artificial hiatus of COVID and throwing petrol on the property fire has subsided, we're moving back to a more normal situation where different areas are growing at different rates at different times. And that's where the real opportunity is to build a diversified portfolio anyway as a consequence of that. And it means that you're just going to have to be much more careful around what type of property you secure and what location to protect yourself in the days ahead. And again, using that flying analogy, I just want to share good old Simon Presley from Propertyology, who I've got an immense amount of time for, recently spoke about the drag and lift effects that are happening on property, because as you well mentioned earlier in our discussion, guys, while interest rates is one factor, there's a whole series of dynamics that influence the property market. So, as you've already mentioned, we've seen rising rentals, and this is a massive rental squeeze that we're seeing. So rents are going to get higher, lower. We're also starting to open the floodgates to overseas migration. And if we get back to the sort of levels that we were pre-COVID, about a couple of 100,000 or more immigrants coming into the country, while it doesn't have a direct immediate impact on property values because they tend to rent initially and generally close to the CBDs, as soon as they put themselves in a position where they can afford to buy property, they start to do so. So that's going to put some fairly sharp demand pressure on that side of the equation. And that, together with the wages growth that will come out of this inflation move. We've got a Labor government now, and the Labor governments are generally quite pro the union movement, which means there'll be some significant pressure on rising wages. We're really in a pretty strong position as far as the lift components of the property side are concerned. And a lot of the drag components are behind us. The federal election, things always go quiet during that, so that's behind us now. the inflation they're starting to tackle with the rising interest rates. So, you know, the major exercise that's affecting people at the moment is purely the mainstream media's over sensationalization of the situation compared to what the reality is going to be. So for me, I think we're coming into a fairly small but rare window of opportunity in the property sphere, because there's going to be a sweet spot where we're seeing softening prices already. As the rates rise, there'll be a soft spot in the middle where the smart investor is going to be able to secure property before their capacity drops too low. And then as rates start to come off, again, depending on what's happening, towards the end of next year, which means there'll be upward pressure on property values again. In the short to medium term, there's actually some pretty good buying opportunities. So again, I'm a bit of a contrarian and always have been, but I like times like this, because when everyone's talking about how things are going to be, if you follow the key principles, it's a great time to be doing a property.
Back to your Warren Buffett quote, really, doesn't it, at the start of the show, in terms of be greedy when others are fearful. But this is where I kind of focus on the fact that I believe what we're in right now, and it's different across all different markets in Australia, but as I'm buying across the country each day for different customers at different price points, you see how it changes. But it's a real, what I call a shoulder season. And there is some fantastic buying opportunities in a shoulder season. We've just come off that peak in most areas. We're not quite at the bottom. So it's definitely in that holiday shoulder season. But you get caught where you're dealing with agents, and there might be still one or two people that are still kind of stuck in that peak mindset. And you've just got to find those opportunities where there's a seller that's panicking and, you know, someone that's got that extra motivation. But therein lies a really good opportunity. I agree with you, to buy very well in this changing marketplace.
So, Scotty, what does that sound like from an agent? How do I identify that type of vendor from an agent phone call? Like, what are the little things? What are the little things that you pick up that I can take home and use?
Well, I mean, I had one today, right? I bought a church in the Hunter Valley today for a customer to do as an Airbnb. And we had done all of our research and due diligence. She thought it was probably worth somewhere in that $750 range, and so did we. And there was no comparable sales. It was just kind of a long series of due diligence. But what happened today, she set me a target price of $725, I think it was, to buy it. And before I got a chance to pick up the phone to the agent rang the buyer and said, I've spoken to the sellers today, and we're adjusting their price expectations because they're motivated sellers. And she fed that back to me. And before I had a chance to ring up the agent and make the offer based on the strategy that we had, I saw that the agent had changed it to a guide price of $580 to $630. Oh, so wow. I went in and I made an offer of $575. I bought it for $580. So I saved her on her revised target price of $70,000 in one phone call. So nice. That's a really good, fresh example today, like at 5 o'clock this afternoon, of a changing market and the ability to spot those things. And the spot was that the phone call that she got from the agent to say the vendors are resetting their expectations. And the second thing was the price guide change. So, I've got a number of these that are going right now across, even in Brisbane and Adelaide, where people are saying the market's really hot, but agents are now saying that they'll accept offers prior to auction, which they never were doing. They're revising target prices in certain states in the country. They're pushing out auction dates. These are all signs that the market is softening, and you can see these things if you're watching the market like a hawk, which you should be if you're buying and you're spending what is one of the biggest financial outlays of your life.
Totally. And just to support what you're saying there too, Scott, I'm sort of very actively looking at a number of locations at the moment. I'm seeing listed prices drop, for properties in excess of $1 million, dropping $100,000 in their asking price within 2 or 3 weeks of listing. I'm seeing properties being taken off the market and then coming back onto the market to try and have another crack at it. Yeah. So the stands are definitely shifting, but particularly in the eastern states. And not quite so much in Adelaide, and because Perth's off such a low base anyway, there's a bit more room to manoeuvre in that space also. But if we look at Victoria and New South and northern Tasmania as examples, I'm certainly seeing dropped expectations, and I'm starting to see vendors who are also getting nervous, given what they're hearing in the media, that things are starting to drop, to try and push the sale through a bit faster than what they otherwise would.
Yeah, and the balance, Joey, to kind of address what we just talked about, is the skill is understanding the spin from the agent and knowing the market conditions as a buyer. So last week we bought one prior to auction on the Monday night, and the Tuesday morning the contracts were signed on the 24 hours before the auction was on. When I started the negotiation at 6 o'clock on Monday night, the agent told me they had 4 other buyers that were going to be competing at auction on the Gold Coast. So that was typical. Like 6 months ago, 3 months ago, there was probably 10 people competing for it at that 1.2 kind of price range for a property like that as an investment. But I put the offer forward anyway, and then he tried to flush everyone else out, and there was no one else. So at 9 o'clock at night, I ended up basically getting offer and acceptance at well below the price they told us we'd had to pay if we'd stop it. But that would never even have occurred 2 months ago or 3 months ago. They never would have given me an opportunity on the Monday night, 2 days or a day and a half before the auction. And then you would never find yourself in that situation where the buyer competition just isn't there. So you have to ask those questions, and you've got to be able to have the confidence to go past what the agent's telling you, because they're going to put a spin on it. His spin was, you've got other competition. There's going to be other people there in 24 hours time, but there wasn't. And that's where people overpay. And that's why I say you're in this shoulder season, because you're educated as a buyer to think, they've got to be telling the truth, because there's absolutely competition on everything that we've seen. Everything's been selling really fast, but the market changes that quick that the interest rates go up, and bang, it's gone up twice, and poof, the buyers are gone. So the buy depth just really thins fast. So you just got to be watching that really closely.
Yeah, and some good opportunities are when a property gets passed in. You can jump on those type of opportunities. You see a property go to auction, and then it doesn't go to auction. You can then jump on those guys. What we'll do, we'll jump into our final ad for the evening. But what have we got here, Bushy? We still got some more slides going.
Yeah, I've got some other stuff that we can just talk about generically in terms of preserving and positioning yourself to ride through. For those that are a bit extended, some of the principles that we utilise. Happy to discuss it or wrap it up now.
That was what I was going to say. Is I want to get into some of the more practical tips and tricks that we can actually use for our portfolio. And this actually looks like this is exactly what the doctor ordered. And then Scotty, I want to talk to asset selection and some of the ways to make sure that we're getting a good investment property as well. So let's jump into this ad, and I'm sorry, Scott, it's going to probably work perfectly.
Put some volume on this one. Yeah.
Commercial property offers the highest cash flow in Australian property investing, offering exceptionally higher yields than residential. Now, we're talking 8 to 10% net yields. That's cash after all expenses, not this 2 to 6% gross that we see in the residential space. So for those that are starting out on their commercial investing journey, it can be exciting, but it's also a step not to be taken lightly. The expertise of a commercial buyer's agent can pay dividends to help you secure that high cash flow and high growth potential property. And this is why we recommend Steve Polisi of Polisi Property. With over 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He has seen it all and knows the best locations right for growth. In a previous life, Steve was a chartered mechanical and structural engineer, so he draws on his mathematical and analytical skills that he's developed to break down what works best in commercial property. As with engineering, same goes with commercial property. It's based primarily on the numbers. So if you're curious about diversifying into commercial property, you have access to $100,000 in cash or in equity, book a call with Steve today and find that perfect asset for you.
I love some of the movie cuts on the the advert there, guys. That's awesome.
The best part of this is I can see your little faces when the ad's playing, and all I saw was Bushy just cracking up at every single new little video coming up, every new quote that came about. I love that.
I was just crying because I know that Steve's ad might convert to return on investment, but my ad was.
We'll have to rerun yours again at the end of the show.
Silent movie when Bushy used to go to primary school buying Sunny Boys.
Yeah, he's Scott Agate again. Okay, I wanted to get into some of the practical real world stuff that people can actually use, because that's what they came here. We want to recession proof our portfolio, Bushy. So what have you got for us, mate? What we've got opportunity knocking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first thing I want to communicate, and I've touched on a couple of these things already, but sort of honing in on it, my own opinion and what's worked very well for me personally, and lots of people that we've helped over the years, is what I call a wealth by stealth approach. And what I mean by that is taking a long-term approach and then using as little of your own money to acquire as big an asset base as you can, as quickly as you can, but making it as affordable as possible. And I'll underline that word affordable again, and then just purely letting the time, the tenant, the taxman, and capital growth do the heavy lifting for you. And the big thing that I see differentiating successful investors from the rest is that the successful ones focus on the principles, the process, and the people that they need to surround themselves with to make it work, whereas the rest focus just on the property. And the property is actually the last thing you need to be considering unless you've got the rest of your ducks in a row, because it's really clear to me that success in property is definitely an elite team sport, and you need to surround yourself with the best of the best, and then just manage your managers in relation to making it happen. So don't try and reinvent the wheel, which is something I did many years ago. I didn't trust anyone, so I was making mistakes that I didn't even know I was making. But the best thing I think you can do is to really surround yourself with independent experts. So I'm not talking about going to one-stop shops, because there's no checks and balances in that equation, but making sure you're surrounding yourself with the best of the best in each and every role that needs to be part of your property team, and then just managing them to make sure that your strategy is being adopted. And the first thing that you need to do is identify where you're at in relation to your long-term journey. So we spoke about this when I was on with you guys last time, and that is,
I think it's a super valuable point. I'd love to dig into this a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I call it the capital growth to cash flow curve, because the really key thing to start out with is to know exactly what the end game looks like for you and what your lifestyle costs per year. That then folds into what size asset base that you need to create over your investment horizon to make that happen. And for most people, you're going to end up in the growth phase. So your major focus needs to be growth, but you need to structure the property in such a way that it's totally covering itself in terms of cost, without relying on you having to put in savings, salary, or live off dog food and baked beans while you're hanging on to the properties, because it just won't be sustainable. And that tends to affect if you're into growth, and I'll talk about structure in a minute, then that affects the type of assets that you need to be investing in. So, the highest growth properties in our country generally, and there's no rocket science in this, are real houses for real people in tightly held suburbs. That's as simple as it gets. That is the sweet spot, versus units, townhouses, and others that are good for yielding properties at the other end of the journey, but they don't experience the same level of growth that good quality homes in tightly held suburbs, where people want to live, where there is strong infrastructure, where there is strong and growing jobs, so that people can continue to pay more for those properties and those locations. That's what's going to give you the best result as far as that's concerned. And I'd love your thoughts on this too, Scott, given your focus on asset quality. Have you got any further thoughts around that?
No, I'm interested to see what you've put up there, and I agree. It's a big focus for me when I'm talking to my clients, and it's not so much that I'm offering advice on that to clients of Hello House, because really we just focus on the negotiation side of it. So occasionally I'll talk people out of buying what I think is a lemon property. But most of the time people have come to us with a firm idea of a particular property they want to buy, whether it's for home or investment. But the reason why it's important to me, and I've got a big focus on it personally, is that so much of the agent selection that we do for our clients that are looking to offload an asset is because they bought a dud. And I've got so many examples of this that, we're offloading properties in the last 12 months because it's the first time they've been able to do that at break even or a small margin to get their money back in nearly a decade or sometimes more. So they've bought into regional areas or dud assets in cities
Mining
that have
towns
underperformed. They've made a lot of decisions based on one-stop shop advice, as you've just said, and buying on the basis of it might be a reasonable yield, but absolutely no growth drivers behind that to give it any substance. So yeah, it's very important, I think, in terms of that once you make the decision that you're going to buy and you go through the setup and surrounding yourself with the right team, as you've just explained, and you get to that asset selection part, that you do buy something that's going to be in demand long term.
Absolutely spot on. So coming back to that affordable growth piece again that we talked about earlier, that is the nub of this whole exercise, because your first focus needs to be on maximum capital growth, but you then need to structure it in such a way that the property is totally covering itself independently, and also embrace what we talked about earlier, in that it is a long-term game. So I've done a lot of research on this over the years, and I'm not the only one who's come to the conclusion that to go through a full property cycle, and remember that each area is going through its own property growth cycle, often out of sync with everywhere else. So you need to, what's happened in the last 2 years where the property
everything grows.
Very rare, very rare. And it's important to recognise that what we've seen in the last 2 years is the second highest property boom in the 230-year history of Australia, guys. That's how big that growth spurt has been, and it's all been artificially created by the fact that rates fell to virtually zero from a cash rate perspective, and the government has poured billions of dollars into the whole equation and printed a lot of money on the way through. But if you start with the assumption that you need to be holding a property for a minimum of 15 years to go through its full property cycle, as I say, that desensitizes the need to try and buy at the bottom and sell at the top, because just like you'll never get it right. You'll never get it right. You'll always miss out on that. And it also de-stresses the exercise, because then you can sit back and relax knowing that, okay, I'm holding it for at least 15 years. Providing I've structured it well so it's covering itself, you don't need to worry anymore. You just need to get out of the road and let it do its thing. So
So what do you say to someone that is saying, I'm trying to time the market? Like I think if I just wait another 6 months, I've got my deposit, I'm ready to buy today, but I think I'm just going to wait it out for 6 months or 9 months and just kind of see how this goes. Like, what do you say to those type of people?
Well, and I'm having these conversations with people right now, actually, because where they're going to get caught is that, as we mentioned earlier, as the rates rise, their capacity drops, and what they think they're going to be able to spend, they won't be able to when they get to the finish line. So we've got quite a rare window of opportunity now to take advantage of that before it gets away from them. I've always believed that the best time to buy is now, if you can afford to do so. I'm going to keep sounding like a stuck record when it comes to this affordability piece.
For good reason. Good reason. I think it's incredibly important.
It's really important, and there's a fair bit of science, and the devil's very much in the detail in relation to achieving that and putting the fat into the equation to make that happen. But if you are adopting that long-term exercise, then it de-stresses the whole equation as far as what you need to do.
Yeah. So I get a lot of... Sorry, go, Scotty. Oh, I was going to say, I get a lot of owner-occupiers over the last 6 months or so saying exactly this, that they'll wait till the market changes till they can... to be able to buy better. But my view of that is as well, if you can't afford what you want to buy, then you're looking at the wrong properties in the first place. Like if it's an affordability thing and you've got to wait for it to come back in check, quite possibly you're overstretching yourself in the first instance and you're starting on the wrong foot.
I agree, and you'll get caught in the
point.
crossfire because while it's true that in the short to medium term we will see a bit of softening in B grade properties over the next 6 months as the rates rise. You might think you're getting it at a cheaper price, but if your capacities come down at the point because you're borrowing the money to do it, then you haven't achieved a thing. The only people that it's worth waiting are those that are paying cash. If you're paying cash and you're trying to pick it up when it comes back a little bit, then yes, but there are very few cash buyers in the equation. If you're borrowing money and you're taking that long-term 15-year approach, just buy every time you can.
And you got to fall back on your advice just before, is it's like catching and trying to catch a knife, isn't it? You who knows when, if you're buying in cash, who knows when you're buying right, whether you bought it, yesterday or tomorrow, that you're not overpaid by 50 grand or 100 grand still. Yeah.
But also property's not really a great asset to buy in cash. Like the whole reason why I love property is the leverage that you get. I can own a $500,000 asset and only pay $100,000 for it. But what I was going to say is we model out, 30-year property plans for clients, and we model it at a 5% growth rate, and you can achieve your goals. Depending on your debt to income and all of that, we balance that out. But realistic goals, you can achieve them at a 5% growth rate. So what we've had in the last, couple of years, 30% growth rates, just a cherry on top. It might not, I don't think we're going to see it again in our lifetime at 30%, but still, 5% still gets you there.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So the time is the big sleeper in all of this. And, if people are wanting or having to create equity in a much shorter time frame, if someone comes and says to me, well, I need to make this happen in 10 years, then they're already putting risk in the equation. And given where the property market is likely to be heading, particularly in the short to medium term, they may need to be a bit more active than just buy and hold. They may need to start looking at renovations and or property development to make that happen. But that comes with a whole world of additional risks in the equation that if they haven't done it before and they haven't surrounded themselves with the right team, they can get themselves in a lot of trouble very quickly, particularly with what's happening in the construction market at the moment, given supply increases, the supply delays in materials, and the shortage of labour. That's a pretty high risk exercise in the current climate.
Yeah, I used to be able to pin down a renovation. I used to look at a property and say, "Yep, that's a $10,000 to $12,000 reno." Now it's like that's a $10,000 to $20,000 reno. Like there's no way to know. You might get lucky,
tradie to do it.
You might get lucky and get a good tradie, but you might not. So you've got to really be careful on that renovation front.
Totally, and the building side as well. I'm a big fan of building, and being an architect and a property project manager for many years, I'm very comfortable with it. But I haven't touched it at all, or suggested people get into it in the last couple of years for the very reason that we've spoken about. But also, given the issues and the challenges that the industry's having, there's actually a lot of builders that are trading. That would have been bankrupt under the old rules, but because they relaxed the bankruptcy rules during COVID, there's a lot of builders who are actually illiquid in terms of their trading activity. So you've got to be very careful if you're going to put your toe into that pond in the short to medium term. I'll be leaving it alone for at least another 12 months before the industry starts to settle down.
So I'm about to start building too. Thanks for that advice.
Yeah, exactly. How's that subdivision going, Scotty? How's the build?
The subdivision's through, so I've manufactured my equity, to Bushy's point. But in terms of building 2 luxury homes, I think I budgeted $1 million each house, and they're both coming in about 1.7. So, and that was only August, September when I started that process. That we worked on 2.5 a square meter with the architect and builder, and they're at 3.9 a square meter at the moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
That doesn't.
How does that change? How does that change your?
Well, I think the thing that saves me in this instance is that the market's done 30% in a year, right? And I feel like I bought that below market, then added value by the subdivision, and then saved by a rising tide in that regard. So it's kind of, that hopefully that's how it plays out in terms of the sale price and substantiate the increase in building costs. But yeah, if you were just building on something that you just bought without having that ability to manufacture equity by the subdivision, it would be impossible. It would be absolutely impossible. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the wow, 70% up. I'm also thinking wow, 70% up in that comment in the bottom corner there.
Yeah.
It's a huge increase. Yeah.
Interesting time. So the key, as I say, is to make sure you're structuring properties to be cash flow positive. And I just want to touch on some of the key things there. And one of the tips that has been around a long time, but I just don't see many people taking advantage of at the moment, is the old PAYG withholding tax variation. Now, I'm not an accountant, don't pretend to be, and nothing I'm talking about tonight is financial advice in any way, shape, or form. I'm just sharing my personal views on and personal experience on this, given what we've done.
So what is that you just spoke about there? What do you?
Yeah, so if you've structured a property well and you've got some depreciation on the property through its capital value or any improvements that you're making, that you can tick the box on a tax depreciation schedule. And let's say that on a decent quality property, particularly over the first 10 years, you're getting anywhere between 6 to 10 grand in deductions from that property on an annual basis. Then rather than wait to the end of the year to get that 10 grand back, you do a PAYG withholding tax variation, which very simply, what that means is that instead of getting the 10 grand back in a lump and then going and spending it on a holiday to Bali, Joe, you get that incrementally back with every pay cycle. So if you pay weekly or fortnightly, 10 grand a year, that's just a bit under $200 a week. You're getting extra in your pay packet, which smooths the cash flow in terms of the holding the property. But it also means if you're plowing those funds into your offset account against your home loan, you're going to slice years off the home loan and reduce your interest bill on that loan pretty significantly. So it's very easy to do. You just need a good accountant who's with it. A lot of accountants don't like doing it because there's a bit of work in it for them. But what happens is that the accountant liaises with the tax office to structure the variation based on an estimate of what the tax return is going to be. They then liaise with your paymaster or your HR department, wherever you work. And then they structure that so you've got that extra $200 a weekish in your pay packet that has the benefits then of effectively smoothing the cash flow situation. So it's a trick that very easy to use, but I just don't see a lot of people taking advantage of it. And even if you're self-employed, as long as you're paying yourself regularly, so for years we're self-employed, but we pay ourselves regularly with a pay slip, then you can still do the same thing and achieve the same result. Or if you're doing BAS statements on a quarterly basis, then you can structure it around a quarterly exercise so that you're at least smoothing the cash flow in some degree. So that's one of the little known, it's probably well known, but little used exercises that can significantly improve the cash flowing of the property if you're in that position. So it'd be well worth investigating that, to look at that one in particular. So that is definitely it. And what goes with that as well is, the style and the age of the property also has a big impact on that. So, rather than buy an old moldy place where you think you're going to do it up on weekends with the mates and shout them a couple of cartons to get the work done, which, I see a lot of, if you're able to buy a property that's, still got a fair distance to run in terms of its capital depreciation, and or you do some works on it to start the clock again on the fixtures and fittings depreciation, then you can significantly cut the bill as far as that holding cost is concerned again. So there's some pretty simple things that you can do around that to make a difference. And as I say, and I've always said, property is very much a game of finance. So the finance structuring and in what you do around that can also make a difference to that cash flowing exercise. So the first thing I suggest people do is automate your money management. And this is, I'm going to start at the bottom and work up from here, because I still see way too many people either don't manage their money at all, or they've got a very complicated system. What I suggest people do is, and it's so easy to automate these days, and to really restrict the budget and make sure you're keeping as much of your hard-earned in offset savings, just limit your discretionary spend to a debit card, and work out how much per week's going to go into that debit card. When that's spent, you don't have any more until next pay, and that then protects you from overspending on funds that you don't shouldn't be touching because you're putting into savings and or the property deposits. So there's some pretty simple things. I won't go into the details of this now, but again, I've broken it down chapter and verse in the book.
That's a great, see, that works really well. That works really well for you. What really worked well for me when it comes to saving is I always like to pay myself first. So I will always put in a fixed amount. So like, let's say I'm saving $3,000 a month. I will always make sure that the first automated pay slip is from $3,000 into my savings account or into the offset account to make sure that it's my property fund. So rather than having to just spend what's on this credit card, it's put all the money, put all my savings away, and then I can do whatever I want with the rest. And then I can pay other people. I'll pay the cafe, I'll pay the bar, I always make sure that I've paid myself first. I like as another option. It's another mentality around it.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways of doing it. The unfortunate thing is, and this is habit forming, this exercise, a lot of people just don't do it. So I suggest 3 accounts. There's the offset savings that everything goes into. Then there's a credit card that never ends up in your wallet, that pays all of your normal bills, council rates, car regos. The whole exercise comes out of that credit card that you hide away somewhere once you've set up those auto payment facilities. And then, as I say, it's just a debit card, so that once there's no money in that debit card, you've got no money to spend. It and all you have to do is focus on that debit card. Then it fine tunes the way you manage your money as a consequence of that. But you're right, Joe. There's no one size fits all here. But having a system that's automated is an absolute key. That's the first thing. Then the other thing that I suggest people do regularly, and I've got a really bad sense of humour and a shocking memory, as I've mentioned, so I use some really bad acronyms, but you need to give your finance regular CPR. And what I mean by CPR is that you need to be looking at the cost of loan, not the rate, because most people just focus on rate. What's hidden behind rate is the impact that offset accounts can have, borrowing capacity, ingoing, ongoing, outgoing fees. You really need to look at what the true cost of that loan is when it's fully functioning. And you need to set it up in a way that's actually helping you to eliminate the debt as quickly as you possibly can, and at the same time building in some risk management to the equation. So applying that CPR generally, the first thing we suggest people do every 18 months to 2 years is to re-benchmark your current lending facilities against the best of what's out there. And it's not unusual, with our broking arm of the business is regularly saving anywhere between $400 and $1,200 a month just by restructuring that exercise. So well worth doing that. And $1,200 a month is equivalent to giving yourself a 20 grand pay rise a year. That's how simple that exercise can be. And unfortunately, the longer you're with a bank, the less they look after you these days. There's no loyalty. They take you for granted. If you're a new customer, they're prepared to bend over and do all sorts of things. So it's well and truly worth making sure that you're working closely with your savvy mortgage broker to regularly fine tune that exercise and keep it in your favour. And even if it's just a matter of picking up the phone and ringing the bank and saying, look, I can get X rate down the road, it's not unusual for a bank then to drop the rate as a consequence. So make sure you're doing that sooner rather than later. I know I keep emphasising this because way too many people nod their head and then don't do anything. And yes, there's some perceived golden handcuffs around the headache of making the change from one bank to the next. But if you're achieving such significant savings and you've got a good broker who's doing most of the work for you, then there's no excuse for not doing that as regularly as you can. So that's another exercise. The structure, though, is a really important one. And the commentary earlier around having a rainy day reserve that you can take advantage of is really key. So the loan structuring that I'm going to suggest and break down here is really important. So let's say you've got a home and you've got a principal interest home loan against it. then you want to make sure you've bolted on a 100% offset account. There are some lenders that will still allow you to have a full 100% offset account on a fixed loan as well as a variable loan. So it's worth investigating that, because offset accounts are sleeping giants in relation to reducing debt. Then the really key thing is to make sure that you're firewalling the home from the investment portfolio. Now, this is lending 101, but the number of times I've seen people walk through the door who have been cross-securitized by a bank because they believe that they're getting a cheaper deal really works against them, because there's a whole series of hamstrings that occur when that creeps in. But if you put that firewall in and you don't cross-securitize, and you've got your home completely independent of your investment portfolio, then there's the opportunity to effectively just do an interest-only loan against the investment property itself. Again, bolt on an offset account to those as well, because eventually you want to be pouring surplus into that, but still have the loan fully drawn so it's fully tax deductible. And the real rainy day reserve piece comes in what we call the war chest. And the war chest is effectively a equity loan initially against the home, if that's your only other security you can put into it. And that war chest covers the shortfall costs of the loan on the investment property plus the establishment costs. But most importantly, you build in a rainy day fund into that war chest, so that if you get to a point where you don't have cash savings or money sitting in an offset account, you've still got really cheap money that you can fall back on to cover any shortfalls for tight periods like we might be about to go into. So, what we normally suggest.
That's a super valuable point. Like, we're hearing it in our group. There was someone that did just this, I think today or yesterday, where they have an offset account and they refinance their account to withdraw, $100,000 worth of equity. They're not using that. They're not buying another property. They're just putting it into their offset. So they've got access to liquidity. And since it's offset, this is obviously not financial advice, and speak to a great mortgage broker like Bushy to explain this better. But you're then offsetting that against the income, the loan. So you're actually not paying any interest on it, but you've got liquidity there if an event and if you need it, a little safety net just in case.
Totally. And you're absolutely right there. The important point of that is that you've got access to the funds, but it doesn't cost you a cent unless you spend it. So it's just giving you that added layer of risk protection in the advent that you're in a situation where you need to find extra funds. Then it's the cheapest money that you'll be able to access to make that happen.
There's a great question here from the audience. How much does Bushy suggest to have in the war chest per property? Do you have a general rule of thumb for where it comes to property?
Yeah, I do. What I normally suggest, again, is that it is just a very basic rule of thumb, but it's 6 months worth of survival money. So if you lost your job and you didn't have any income coming in apart from the rent on your investment property, then make sure you've got 6 months worth of breathing space sitting in that war chest equity line facility. So that's normally enough to do it. And that, depending on how much you're earning, that's anywhere between sort of 20 grand and 50 grand roughly that you need to set aside to cover that exercise, because it's your employment actually that's your biggest risk. The properties aren't it's your employment. If you lose your job, then the whole stack of cards can fall over pretty quickly if you don't have income protection insurance, or you don't have ready monies to fall back on until you actually find alternative employment. It can still be used to cover a loss of rent if you've got a rental issue or damage to a property if the insurance is not going to cover it. So that war chest rainy day reserve fund can cover a number of purposes, but I've normally based it on about 6 months worth of breathing space to give you that comfort level.
I put away I put away $5,000 per property, and then just kind of top it up if one property's being, take from one, move to the other. But I think 6 months worth is probably a better way to go with it. And you don't have to worry about it again. Once it's built, it's there, it looks after itself, and you can worry about it later.
Spot on. And the other key thing that I suggest people do from a risk protection perspective as well is to make sure that you spread your portfolio across a number of lenders. So, it's very tempting to say, oh, I'll just stick it all with one bank because they'll give me a cheaper rate anyway. But there are some inherent risks in doing that if you've got all of your security with one lender. And we've had people come to us over the years where that they've got standalone loans. So each property's got an independent loan on it. It's not cross-securitized, but because it's with the one lender, then it can still trigger a re-evaluation every time you want to do something with the portfolio. And if there's been a drop in value, like we're about to go into, then you may find yourself in a situation where you can't do what you're intended to do because the bank is going to maintain its own risk protection in that regard. So I know a quick example of that.
Yeah, right.
We had someone we had someone who had an investment property and we didn't help them with any of this, but they had an investment property in a mining town up in Queensland. They had their owner-occupied home in Perth. They went to sell their property in Perth, and it was with one of the major banks. That triggered a re-evaluation of their portfolio because the investment property had dropped in value significantly. The bank wouldn't let them sell the house. Wow. So I'd be very careful to make sure that you actually split your facilities up. It will cost you a little bit more, but remember that the investment side of the debt is tax deductible in any event. But it gives you that extra level of protection, but also flexibility, so that if you do need to make a change, whether you're going to upgrade your home or at any point in time you're changing the portfolio, you're not going to be restricted by the bank in terms of allowing that to happen. But certainly that war chest exercise is a key component of that rainy day reserve that we're talking about. So
just high level, just another question that's popped up here that I think is super valuable, and a lot of people will be asking is, does Bushy offset this against a PPOR? So is this offset against our investment properties or our owner occupiers, and why?
Yeah, I'm not an accountant, so I'm got to be very careful.
You don't sit on the fence.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to sit on the fence, but again, it depends on how the accountant sees it and how it's interpreted by the tax office, because you've got to be a little bit careful about using investment funds for personal use. So, because I have seen people over the years who put the war chest funds from their which is effectively an investment loan used to help secure the investment property, and park the money in the offset account against the owner-occupied property to effectively reduce the debt burden and the interest bill on the owner-occupied property. But depending on how your accountant and the tax office views that, and or if you have an audit, they may get you to redirect how those.
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic point. I did a cash refinance, and I wasn't allowed. I was speaking to my accountant, and he's like, you have to put that money into your offset for your your investment properties, because if you have it against the offset of your PPOR, you have, most of the time everyone says have it against your PPOR because it's non-deductible debt. But I then couldn't touch that money and drag it into the account. So I literally have an account which has, X dollars in it, saying do not touch. you can't move that into there, because as soon as you do, it muddies the water for the ATO, and you can get double taxed, or you get taxed on it.
Yeah, and I've always said to people, it's not a matter of if you will have a tax audit, it's a matter of when that occurs, because it will occur at some point in time.
Yeah, technology is getting better. They can do it so much more easier than they used to be able to.
And they're on the hunt. Given that the federal government's sort of locked up a pretty significant debt over the last couple of years, I've heard from accountants that they are on the hunt to try and claw back as much as they can in tax wherever they can get it. So be very wary of stepping outside the line as far as that's concerned.
So just cautious of time, because I know we've covered a lot off, and I know you've got. I don't think your slideshow ever ends. I think we had you on. I think we built it up last time with you, and it's trailing on from there. But what I wanted to do real quick was run through like a practical thing that people can do. So for people that haven't really recheck their budget and stuff, I made a little spreadsheet that I'll share with the group, which is super super practical and useful for people. So we will give this one away. You'll be able to download it for free. So I just wanted to jump in here before. Sorry, Bushy. This is going to be
good,
me pitching our free product with free technology that spent hours doing it. But this here is just a super simple budget that allows you to see where all your money's going and what it's doing. So you've got your income, your expenses, you've got your property fund, if you want to call it that. And all you do is you enter in your income up here. This is all just dummy data. You enter in all your expenses down here, and then it buckets all of those expenses from a yearly perspective and then a monthly perspective. And then you see the net outcome and you see it in a pretty chart. So everyone, if anyone wants access to that, they can jump on the newsletter that we'll be sending out this week. Jeff, if you're watching that, throw the newsletter link in there. But the real tab that I wanted to share was the interest rate analysis tab, which is exactly what you were talking about, Bushy. What does it actually look like in real terms if our interest rates go up? So I pulled one of my properties that I have. I pulled the real numbers for it. And I've entered that in to see what would happen if all that happened. So the purchase price is, the value now is 520. The loan amount is 278,000. That's a 55% loan to value ratio here. The potential withdrawable equity that I could use is 123,000. So I could actually remortgage that and get 123,600 out. There is an interest only tab. So you can see the difference between principal and interest only, and then your interest rate, and then how much rent you're getting in and your expenses. And then we just go down. I'm currently at, what am I at? 2.69% interest rate. Net, that is 4,000 positive, which is $344 a month. And what if interest rates rise to 2.75? What if they go to 3? What happens if they go 3.5? And I'll be positive until 4.25, where I'll be down $209 a year. And you just keep going until you get to a point where you can no longer afford the property. And that's where you start to stress test all your portfolio. So check it in there and throw all your deals in there. But one thing that I did want to point out is why I love property so much is we've got the growth factored in as well. So the net position, when you factor in, yes, you may be losing to, $1,500, but the growth, if it's growing at, 6%, that is still gone up to $28,000. So people who are like waiting to buy, you're losing these type of opportunities by not moving forward with the loan that you've currently got, if that makes sense. But I need to just kind of tweak a few numbers and digits and make it look a bit prettier so we can share it with everyone. But that's a practical thing that you guys can use right now. This bit here takes a little bit of time to enter in. You just enter in, you have to download your statements and look through it. How much, did I spend on electricity? Was it a quarterly? Was it weekly? I mean, was it weekly, monthly, or quarterly? It does all the numbers and calculations for you. And then you get a pretty chart to see, I've got, $42,000 for saving on my property fund. I've got $3,400 for a fund or a holiday fund. And that is awesome. I think it's cool.
I think you should have called your business another PP, which was practical and pretty.
That's great work, Joe. That's really good.
Really well, Joe, with your outlook. That's a beautiful spreadsheet. Well done.
It is awesome,
It's a pretty spreadsheet, isn't it?
It is. That's really good. And a very usable tool, mate. And I think very generous of you to share it with the community, mate. It's awesome work. And that's a great time to jump in because it covered pretty much on the main points of what I wanted to talk about. We probably don't need to go through the rest, to be honest, mate. We're getting into very fine detail. The major big hits are the stuff that we've already covered off on.
Yeah, well, that would be awesome. Everyone, throw some questions and comments into the little chat box. I will throw the link for the newsletter. So the only way to get access to it is to actually be in the newsletter, which I imagine we have some super fans on here. So most people already are. But if you're not, you can join that. And One thing that we were going to talk a little bit about now, we were going to talk about was some principles for the asset selection side of things, Scotty. Were there any other key points that you wanted to touch on in that scenario?
I think we covered off on most of it between Bushy and I in terms of what we were thinking. I don't know if anyone had any specific questions around it, but and it will vary greatly for people that are looking at buying. Maybe I was about to spit out something that was wrong. I was about to say it varies greatly if you're looking at a principal place of residence or an investment, but it doesn't actually vary greatly because the sweet spot, as Bushy said, is where there's going to be job growth, wage growth, where people want to live. It's around those infrastructure hubs, those new infrastructure investment hubs, great transport links, access to lifestyle, and affordability, which is the key thing I took away from this, which I really love, Bushy, was it's got to be affordable, and affordable growth was the term that you used. I think was a really good one. So I think we covered off on most of it. I think they're the key things for me for the basis of a good asset selection. And of course, you should be going through and putting a big red line through busy roads and under flight paths and other things like that are that have got visual cues straight away that are going to be a turn off in a what might be a flat market or a down market if you need to sell as an emergency for whatever reasons that you can't get rid of it anywhere near what you paid for it because you bought a B or C grade asset.
Yeah, one thing that is key to me, and I talk a little bit about, is a T intersection. So if there's traffic lights and you drive, you don't want all the headlights just in a house. And I don't think a lot of people think about that, or on top of a roundabout, because all those headlights just flash straight through straight through the front windows, and it really gets annoying. Also checking any easements on the property. So if you're there are platforms that allows you to check for easements. So if there's a big water line up the middle of the property, I mean, Bushy, you do the development, but you can't develop on a massive easement like that. And they are usually always on the title as well, and the information disclosure statement that the real estate agent gives you. So always ask your conveyancer, or read it through yourself, but then ask your conveyancer, hey, are there any easements? Ask the agent, are there any easements?
That falls back on the advice of if you're buying to add value and manufacturing equity and you're looking at doing those things, then surround yourself with the right people. And if you surround yourselves with the right people in that instance, you're going to be talking to a town planner or an architect or a draftsperson who should absolutely have access to all those things, that can understand the highest and best use of these properties. So I think that's a really good one, is reach out to a team of professionals to surround yourself with and build and conquer from there.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of, like, you guys as experts yourselves have a great team around you that do certain things. Like that's what I love about this community. We've got people in the group where you can just reach out and say, hey, look, I know I'm not, I don't need a mortgage right now, Bushy, but I'd love to get some of your architect, client, experts, and, reach out and do those type of things. And it's amazing what people are willing to give.
The best advice I can give anyone is build it on paper first, in terms of doing your numbers. So, that one of the very first things that we do, because most people stop at, okay, I've got this amount of equity and I've got this borrowing capacity, so I can spend this amount on a property.
Yeah.
Now that's where most people stop, and they go, here's a mortgage, here's the rent, here's the gap. That's how much I'm going to be down. But that's only part of the equation. So the one thing that I would highly recommend people do, and we use some pretty sophisticated software that enables us to be able to look at exactly how much per week in year 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, that property is likely to either cost or put in your pocket before you pull the trigger on buying the property at all. Because if you don't know that amount of detail, you're not really going to be sure whether the property is going to be affordable to hold over that duration or not. So, that I use the expression the bare facts, which is, if we break it down, borrowings, equity, which determines purchase price, affordability is the third part. So that's the A. So, really do your numbers on, is it truly affordable? What is the actual cost per week, or how much money is that property putting in my pocket every week, and then the R is the risk. Make sure you've built layers of risk protection around the portfolio, so that if we're going through periods like we are now, where the rates are going to rise and the costs are going to go up, then you've got a number of layers around that to protect yourself, to see you through those periods, so you can actually hold the property for the 15 to 20 year duration that's going to give you the results that you're after.
Bushy, what's your... Oh, sorry, Joe.
Go, mate. You go.
I was going to say, there's a question there that popped up there, and I'm interested to get your take on this. For the long term, say 15 years plus, would you get a B grade asset in an A1 location or an A grade asset in a C grade location?
Oh, great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I would go location every day of the week. So about 80% of the growth comes from the location, not from the property. So I go through what I call a macro, micro, and micro look. So I look at the macro first, then I look at the micro, which is the suburb and the precinct, before I narrow down on the property. But if I'm going for growth, most of it's going to come from the area, not from the specifics of the property. They all need to line up, by the way. So I'd be going for an A grade property in an A grade location, is where I would be putting my energy.
Yeah, just run
anywhere.
Run the numbers on what the compounding growth factor looks like on a C grade asset at 3% growth and an A grade asset at 7% growth. You're going to be blown away.
Well, I'll give you a quick example of exactly that, Joe, because I've broken that down in the book, in the Freedom Formula. A 3% differential on a $400,000 property over 20 years will put an extra $803,000 of equity in your pocket. It's a 75% increase just through the 3% differential in growth.
Asset selection is so important. So I would say the same as what Bushy said. Go for, as close as you can to the best street in the best suburb, even if you have to buy a sub grade asset, as long as it does the job and ticks the boxes in terms of rental income or quality lifestyle, but you're going to get dragged up in a rising tide.
Yeah. I'm having these conversations daily with clients where, oh, look, this location that we're buying in, we can't find the property at $500,000. Let's just go to this location. It's well, but no, it's not. That place is not a good place to be buying. So although we'll just wait, we'll find a great asset. It's going to come up through the research and blah, blah, blah. But we're not going to just settle. Like, don't settle for a crappy property. Because settling is when you start to get some dodgy assets, and the dodgy assets are the hardest. Like if it's hard to buy, easy to sell. Yeah, easy to that's the one.
Yeah,
we know what you mean.
We'll go with that. There was another question here, and everyone throw in other questions that you got along the way. Bushy, do you have any concerns with hyperinflations? And tenants' ability to cover the rent costs in that period?
No, I don't think when you get to hyperinflation, guys, in that context. However, it is very clear that we are in an extremely tight rental squeeze at the moment, which isn't going to go away anywhere time fast. We've got some real supply side issues, and I've been saying for a while now that at some stage, governments at all levels are going to have to put on their big boy pants and start looking seriously at housing supply, and not just units and apartments, because leaving it to the private sector, and we're all in the private sector, and it's a just-in-time approach. We'll only do things if there's an absolute demonstrated need. Well, we've got a massive housing shortage still in this country, and we're about to pour a couple of 100,000 extra people into it on an annual basis moving forward. Then while I don't believe we're going to have hyperinflation, we're certainly going to have some continuing upward pressure on rental levels. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But the old supply and demand situation will level itself out of time in any case.
A follow-up question on that one. Why does Bushy think we won't reach hyperinflation?
Yeah, well, I think if we come back to the old economic jumbo exercise, and the RBA sitting in the pilot seat with their hand on the interest rate handbrake, we are likely to reach around the sort of 6 to 7% level in the short to medium term. But with the activities that the RBA is taking now on interest rates and they've still got the opportunity to use macroprudential changes to put pressure on the banks in terms of their lending policy to further dampen if they need to. I just don't see that we're going to hit hyperinflation. I'm not seeing it. We're in a very different position to the United States, for example, where inflation is at a much more rampant level. We're in a much healthier position in Australia in that regard. So I don't think we're likely to get there.
Yeah, and the Australian economy is doing really well. Like we're actually doing as a country, we're doing incredibly well. I was looking at some of the stats.
Yeah, this is the thing that's not recognised, and you'll never hear it in the press. But the fact that we are lifting interest rates is a big tick that our economy is going extremely well. It might sound contrarian again, but the fact that they are jacking up rates is a massive indicator that the country is actually positioned and the economy is actually chugging along extremely nicely, almost growing too fast, and that's why they're pulling on the handbrake.
Yeah, exactly. It's the government feeling confident enough that we can slow down our spending to be able to balance out some of the other things over in this side of thing on the inflation side, but they're comfortable enough to do that. Yeah. Well, this has been a very well-rounded conversation. There's been inflation, there's been RBA rates, there's been practical things to be able to find good assets. Thank you guys for covering off. If you guys throw out any questions, it's been 2 hours. It flies along.
Wow, that's really far out.
Thank you, Bushy. That was very informative and enjoyable. Thank you.
That was great. As I say from the outset, I'm very humbled and honoured to join you guys. You've created a awesome community. I really take my hat off to you guys in the active community that you've created. It's such a rarity to find a very positive, proactive community that's creating a circle of safety where people can openly share and ask as many questions as they like to improve their own knowledge and their own performance in property moving forward. So I congratulate you guys, and anything I can do to continue to assist you and your community, you just yell out, because I'll be there with bells on.
Yeah, no, here's someone's written it perfectly. You indispensable man. That is that is my dream in life, for someone to say that to me. What a compliment. And it's very well founded. There's another question in here. How important is it to value add subdivision extra room for an investment grade property? Let's say if the property is an A grade asset in an A grade location on a good sized block and the numbers stack up, but has no potential for value add, would you still proceed with the purchase? Oh,
yeah, I would. So I always talk about the holy trinity of growth, cash flow, and value add. It's in the last couple of years, it's been much more difficult to tick the value add box, because the value add comes in terms of either buying below market value at the outset, being able to instigate renovations that are going to significantly increase the value of the property, and or being able to subdivide and redevelop at a later point in time. But if you've got an A grade property in an A grade location, and you've structured it the right way, and you're holding it for the right length of time, you don't need to do anything else.
Also, the A grade asset in an A grade location with A grade value add potential as well is A grade expensive. So the rental yield will be very low on that. Right. You'll be paying a premium with lots of big fish chasing you for that as well. So it's not an easy, it's a bit of a property unicorn to a certain degree. And you've got to have deep pockets to fulfill that list.
Yeah, and you're spot on there, Scott, because it's something that we haven't talked about. But again, in terms of sweet spots, you've got to buy a property at a certain price point that also has a rental yield that makes sure that's going to cover itself. So if you're spending a lot more, if you're buying a $600,000 property versus a $1.2 million property, then and it's still a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-living, double garage property, then you're not going to get a lot more rent for the $1.2 million property over the $600,000 one. I'm using a pretty bad example here, but there is a sweet spot there in terms of price, yield, and growth that is going to protect itself. If you overspend in that capacity and then end up being in a negative geared position, then you put yourself in that risk where we hit rough turbulent times with rising rates and whatnot, where that could get a bit sticky. So it's sort of getting all of these levels in the right location in the crosshairs to make sure that you are not only securing a property that's going to perform very well over time, but from that cash flow affordability perspective, you're still not going to put yourself at risk when we hit those speed bumps on the way through.
And where is that kind of sweet spot? Like, where would you kind of say, is it like a 850 and below, a 600 to 700, or a 500 to 700? Have you got any kind of rule of thumb? The problem is the market moves a lot as well, and that guide then moves.
I wouldn't put a rule of thumb around that because rental levels and property prices vary so much from one suburb to the next, yet alone from one state to the next. But again, it's about running the numbers. You'll be able to tell very quickly once you do the numbers whether it's covering both the capital growth and the cash flow component.
Yeah. I always say buy the best property in the best location at the best price for your buyer brief. What is the brief that you actually need? Is this property, do you need, how much cash flow do you actually need? Does it need to be $2,000, $3,000? Can it be a little bit negative because you're going to compensate it with another property that's going to be slightly more positive, so you can then balance it out? So you're not just balancing an individual property, you're also balancing your entire portfolio as well.
Spot on.
But Bushy, how do people reach out to you? How do they learn more? How do we get more Bushy in our lives? Because 2 hours just isn't enough. It's not enough for us.
Just reach out to me at knowhowproperty.com. That's the easiest.
And read the books.
Well, you can get invested for free. I again, as a value add to people, I give the Get Invested book away for free. So if you just jump on our website knowhowproperty.com, that's KNOWHOW property.com.au. Just follow the links, and there's a pop up there where you can grab the book. You get the ebook version for free. The actual hard copy is for free as well, but you just pay for postage. So depending on where you're at, it could be anywhere from a postage stamp to a few bucks to get it sent to you. But that will at least whet your appetite to the opportunity that's there. And then that's a great intro into the bigger book, The Freedom Formula, which gives you the step-by-step process. If you want to hear more of me, I've now got the pleasure of hosting the Realty Talk Show, which Kevin Turner used to host for many years. He's built up a massive audience on that show, and we have some great guests, the likes of Scott Agate, on that show on a regular basis to share all things property. And if you want to do a deep dive, then the Get Invested podcast is also a great place, because I get to rub some shoulders with some fantastic legends in all things investment on that show as well. So I'd love to help you and share as much with you as I can so that everyone can achieve their own lifestyle goals long term.
You're a good man, Bushy. Well done.
I appreciate it. And Scotty Agate, thank you for being a co-host today. You've done way better than Jeff ever has.
It's coming off a very low base, though. Let's be honest.
And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be having a break off, and Jeff is going to show you how to run the ads successfully. So we're all going to do well. But Scotty, you are the expert negotiator, as we've been told. How do people reach out to you? Because you do both negotiating and also helping agent finders. So if you have purchased a property and it is a little bit stretched and you do think now is the best time to sell it, what do they do?
Well, they can find me on Bushy's show. It's probably the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
I get there reasonably often enough. But the easiest way to find me is hellohouse.co. So that's an easy way if you're looking to offload a property or you need help negotiating a new one.
And let me just say here that one of the most under recognized exercises in the whole property equation is the value of good negotiation. And I've been searching for years to find someone in the buyer's agent space that's good at negotiating. It's only when I came across Scott recently that I finally found someone who really has made that into both an art and a science. So, you know, if you're only buying a property once every 3 to 5 years and you're up against a sales agent who's doing it multiple times every week, you're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage. Do yourself a massive favor and have a chat to Scott, because that negotiation piece can make or break the exercise. And it's not just about price. There's a whole bunch of variables that go into negotiating a successful outcome. And I know firsthand that Scott's very good at doing that. So I really think you're at the pointy end of a growing niche sector there, Scott. You really are unique in that capacity. And I really do highly recommend people reach out to Scott, because it takes all the stress out of the whole equation in terms of negotiating it, and you're more objective in terms of making sure that you're securing the right property at the right price and at the right terms. So make sure you do it.
Very kind. Thanks, Bushy, for the nice review. Much appreciated.
Yeah, we're gonna cut that out, and then that'll be the next ad.
That's my new ad.
Yeah, it's hard to get studio performed. Yeah, studio performed ads. So that was perfect. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Well, let's go out there and let's go buy a property. See you later. Have a great evening.
Talk soon. Bye.
Take care.